Assalamu alaikum, everybody, and welcome back to Connections. We are here for season two. So, Alhamdulillah, we had a wonderful experience. Last year in 2020, we launched the Connections Conversation series, which was really an informal conversation kind of series platform, whatever, where Sheikh Idris and I were just talking about things that we were interested in, but it really began to kind of grow into something else. And inshallah, soon you'll be seeing them on the podcast platforms. But we did want to continue this conversation, ongoing conversation, because we've benefited from it. I know I benefited from it tremendously, and many of you out there as well. And so we wanted to come back, inshallah ta'ala, bigger and better, and continuing these explorations. A little bit of background about myself. I am Dr. Mazen Atasi. I'm a naturopathic doctor and a homeopath and a somatic counselor. So Sheikh Idris and I both share an interest in the somatic work. Sheikh Idris, of course, is a Islamic scholar, spent many years abroad in Morocco and different places, North Africa, and I think even Syria, if I'm not mistaken.
No, I've not been to Syria
No, not
actually.
been
It's
to
one of the
Syria,
places I've been to. Yeah,
but you were in Morocco for some time, and
yeah, Morocco, and I've visited other countries, Egypt and
Mhm.
Iraq and Jordan briefly, but I've not. I've only lived in Morocco.
Okay, mashallah.
Yeah.
And also, Sheikh Idris is interested in, of course, the somatic work. He spent time with Hakim Archuleta and has learned from him and has been mentored by him as well. And so we share many common connections in that way. But I think the biggest, most common interest we have is in the somatic work and the way that it intersects with spirituality, with personal growth and development, emotional intelligence and cultivation, relational cultivation. And so this is what brings us here. And we ask Allah Ta'ala to give this tawfiq, inshallah Ta'ala, as we continue to learn. All of us are in this here together. We certainly don't come here as masters or as gurus of this work, but we do have an interest in years of learning and sharing and refining. And so we're here to share that with you, inshallah ta'ala. And of course, feedback and questions are always welcome. Those questions fuel oftentimes our personal inquiries and the inquiries that we have here on this show, inshallah ta'ala. So without further ado, we will, inshallah ta'ala, commence the first episode, which will be on fitra. Fitra is a concept that is very central, I believe, to much of Islamic spirituality, Islamic medicine, Islam in general. And fitra is simply the idea that the human being has a unadulterated purity within, this unconditioned purity that he and she are born with and he and she maintain throughout the course of their lives. And it is something that totally informs in some way their personhood and the way that they can potentially relate to God in the deepest and most pure way. There is much to be said about it. I don't want to spend too much time here in the introduction because I don't want to kind of limit it. I'd rather it come spontaneously in the conversation. But in some way, I do want to say something. Um, you know, one of our teachers, he describes the fitra as something that is universal, but in particular to every single type of creation. So the human being has a type of fitra, but it is distinct to the human being. And then you have other creations out there, different types of animals and plants and certain types of creatures that Allah Ta'ala has created, each of them having a fitra, a primal kind of matrix of being, which sustains them, which is the source basically of their vitality, of their personhood, their gifts, their challenges individually. And this thing is what knows God. And this thing is what we were operating through in the life before we came here. And so much of the task that we are invested with in this world is to return to that fitrah, to that purity, which we'll continue to explore today. But this concept is so important, and I find it so relevant to the healing work specifically because oftentimes people come with so much shame and so much baggage and so much self hatred. And they think, Am I good? Can I become someone like these great people out there? And I tell them, of course you can. That part of you is still there. That part of you remains untraumatized, remains unconditioned by the events of your life. As one of my teachers said, experience does not override purity. Experience is not the antithesis of purity. Quite the contrary, actually. And inshallah ta'ala, I hope that in this conversation we can begin to reorient to this fitra and begin to perhaps even craft a fitra centric paradigm that is beautiful, that is goodly, that is something that we can all partake in and share and give gratitude to Allah for, as opposed to coming into something of the world whereby we begin to relate to ourselves and one another in a way that's ugly, that we're sinful, that we're broken. No, we are quite the contrary, beautiful beings made from love, and Allah Ta'ala wanted to be known, and He created the human being to be the reflection of His divine names and His attributes, and to carry prophecy, and to be in His and her most highest potential, the deputies of God on earth, inshallah, the khulafa al-ard. And so, inshallah ta'ala, today, this may be a multi episode exploration. I don't know. We will see. I'm very excited to get into it. And so, yeah, Sayyidi, Sheikh Idris, how do you conceive of this notion of fitra? How do you begin to organize it within your worldview, clinically and spiritually, personally, all of this? And how can we begin to kind of open this conversation, inshallah ta'ala?
Yeah, I like the term you use, fitra-centric. And it's interesting that you mentioned that because I know that Dr. Abdullah Rothman and Dr. Rashid Skinner, in their work, their courses they've run in Cambridge Muslim College on Islamic psychology, that is probably the pivot of their teaching is around this concept of fitra.
Yes.
But yeah, the way I sort of understand fitra is first and foremost from an etymological point of view. This fatara means that it splits forth, and from the splitting forth, there's growth. So they talk about, for example, a mushroom. It's like it's a specific white mushroom that it comes forth from. So it's like is it spores? Would you say with the fungi, and then it's like in the environment, then it settles, and there's this growth that comes from it.
Oh wow.
Other things we have iftar, like breakfast, breaking the fast, because you end something and then something emerges, and from there's growth because you're eating food and you feel life come and there's growth to it. So it has this idea of splitting, cutting through something, and then there being growth, and there's an emergent property. And the way I also understand it as it's fitra, I sort of look at it from the perspective of potentiality, the potential within, rather than it's an emergent property that holds potential towards, and me studying personal centered approach in my counseling diploma is very similar to Carl Rogers' concept. Well, I find there's a lot of correlation between fitra and his concept of actualization, because the humanistic school had the understanding that the human being is inherently good, and it's trying to actualize something, like a plant going towards light. It's or trying to work through the brickwork or the tarmac or whatever. It's trying to break through, or the soil, break through the soil towards something. It feels within it this desperate urge to grow. And even in our dysfunctionality, there's this almost underlying desire to connect to something that's whole, but it's almost been skewed. And we see this demonstrated in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, the classic hadith, where the Prophet ﷺ says every child or every newborn is born on a fitra, i.e. a potentiality towards growing towards its inherent right and its wholeness. that's dormant in the child. But and there's two I think there's two aspects to that. There's that inherent growth it will grow towards in itself, towards whatever it's going to grow towards. Just like when you cut yourself, the skin grows naturally to back in order to sort of heal from the cut. It works immediately. All the blood cells rush to the cut, the wound, to attend to it, to bring it back to wholeness. And then there's the other aspect of that sometimes you need a cast. You do need outside external support for the fitra to take place. And the Prophet ﷺ spoke about both those faculties in that hadith, because he said that every child is born on a fitra, on this potential, this primordial nature that wants to potentiate. And then its parents, notice it brought in the tarbiyah piece. So that there's a part that's inherent, but it does need direction. And that direction, which I find so interesting, this hadith, because he says that then he doesn't mention Islam whatsoever. He doesn't mention someone makes him a Muslim. So the understanding here is that Islam's a natural way. Like if man were left to his own devices, but also guided, being observant to the need of the child. So there's not this almost you leave a child to it and it's just going to suddenly become, no, there is a parental thing where there's a guidance, but it's almost listening to his nature and listening to the feedback as you're taking him through the process of growth. And then he says the parent makes him either a Jew, Christian, or Zoroastrian. What I find so interesting about those three there that the Prophet also mentioned, albeit they were the predominant, well-known religious communities beyond Islam at the time. But if you look at Judaism has the understanding that we're select people, we're almost the chosen people, and so it's very easy a skewing of the nature is that you feel I'm inherently, I have a birthright, and no matter what happens, I deserve something. That's a skewing of the fitra, is that you feel that I'm a chosen person, and regardless of my actions, I'm chosen to be of the promised people. So that's the one way that the fitra is skewed, is that someone starts to believe they don't really have to do anything, and they become complacent, and they feel that I'm chosen anyway and selected, and anyone else is not, if they're not from my tribe. Second one is Christianity's, if you look at it, it's a form of pantheism, in terms of you see God in the creation, that he became part of creation. So it's an idea that everything's here, and that God is part of the universe, and that everything. But we know that deep within the human being, there's a part of us that wants to continually transcend beyond. So it's extending towards something that's always higher. And it's not that God comes down in that way. And then the last ones are Zoroastrians, is that there's a constant clash between two forces, good and evil. That almost these two polar forces are constantly in clash with one another, and we're caught between those two forces. So you always live in a state of anxiety, because you believe that these two are,
it's unstable.
So all of these sort of demonstrate the fitra. The nature of the fitra is that is towards wholeness, and that everything there's an inherent optimism that we're moving towards wholeness, and that's fundamentally what the human being is craving and moving towards, even in its dysfunction. When we see it apparently deep within, if we really listen to it, there is a yearning for it to connect to something that moves it towards health.
Absolutely. So there's that transcendent principle there of the fitra that's so important. But there's also what I'm hearing, and I really resonate with deeply, and I really feel like we need to just note it here at least, is the lack of a mechanistic kind of framing of the human being at the foundational level. Like when there's an essential spiritual transcendent potential reality deep within, that's not something that can really be organized and drilled down and quantified, and you can done lab testing for it to analyze. Like there's something else utterly about the human being, and that totally puts the entire conventional perspective on the human being and on healing, and even this type of spirituality and religious practice, sometimes even this rigidity and this quantity based, quantity centric, even maybe, as opposed to really truly fitri centric, quality centric. It's a whole other paradigm, right? And so there needs to be like the transcendent, but also the immanent here as well, which is process. They're both process. One kind of spreads out its roots, and the other, again, that image of the tree extends out with the branches. Both of those are the fitra. And it starts off perhaps as a kernel, as a seed. And I often use the metaphor of a flower. Like, and the tarbiyah piece also kind of struck me, because like the seed needs to be cultivated and nourished. Like it needs water. It needs sunlight. It needs nutrient dense soil. But once those three things are there, the seed will have no choice but to germinate. I mean, the conditions are perfect. It will be spontaneous in its germination and its thriving. But if there's no water, if any sunlight is not meeting the actual seed, whatever, if there's poison in the soil, it's not going to, or it's going to be ugly. It's going to be unhealthy. It's going to be unactualized in its fullest potential, which is disease states, which is these conditions of unhealthy conditions that can arise within the human being, right? And so I love that there's this transcendence, there's this transcendent inclination in the fitra, and also this spreading out and this growth here and now too. It's both. We're not only supposed to be just launching off Earth. The fitra is about launching off of here, but also just being here and being in awe here and growing here and seeing that Allah's names in everything around us and glorifying Him and having gratitude here and now. And that openness of heart in the here and now is a type of transcendence, but also a type of just presence too, and appreciation. That's something that I think only the fitra can really, if accessed, can allow for, holding both of those things.
Yeah, no, it's true what you just said. Is that the scholars say with all the verses that speak about, that use the verb fatara or the name of Allah, fatir, or talk about fitra, there's three components. They say there's the rububiyyah of Allah, i.e. He's nurturing us and He's sustaining us.
Yeah.
And tarbiyah, i.e. the act of that. So the rububiyyah of Allah is lordship, His nurturing quality, the actual process of that taking place. And alhamd is the third. Is that you'll always see those three themes included in whenever the term fitra or fatir, Allah's name, or the verb fatara. And I really like what you just said about providing the conditions for growth, like the soil and the environment. And you'll see that the Prophet ﷺ in that hadith is talking about he's not just talking about, he starts with fitra, that it's born on a primordial potentiality, but there's a social factors. And so and Carl Rogers even said that his belief was that if the three core conditions were in place, which he said was empathy. So if I'm with a client and I'm empathic, and then I'm congruent, so I'm displaying what's with me, so there's this congruence, I'm being genuine in myself and genuine with the client. And then the third one, positive unconditional regard. So you're just holding that, not judging the person, but you're really trying to understand them. He says then the actualization naturally happens with you just having those three conditions in place.
What was the first one? I got compassion and positive regard.
Empathy, congruence, and then unconditional positive regard.
Yeah, nice.
So he says that the therapist, he brings that to the table. Then it's the client, he doesn't have to do anything but that. The client's actualization, self-actualization takes place. He feels the growth within him.
That's stunning. I love that. Part of the NARM model that we employ is they focus so much on countertransference here. And it's like, just come and just hold the space. And as you're able to do that, you're going to be able to not only not bring your stuff in, but keep the space, the healing space, the doctor-patient relationship space, just clear. And it's like, because everyone's constantly projecting their stuff. So you cannot bring, when you don't do that, the person will immediately feel that. And it's in that new kind of frontier that the growth edge can emerge, that they can begin to poke their head out and be like, oh, it's safe now. I can actually maybe begin to access some of these things. And then do that, allow that fitri kind of process to emerge. I love that. One of the things that I was reading about Fitra, I think you'll like this, is Ibn Khaldun in the Muqaddimah was talking about Fitra. And he talks about how the Bedouins are the closest to Fitra by their nature, and that civilized people or people living in settlements are, they tend to kind of move away from the Fitra. So this natural order of things within themselves and also in the way that they live as well. Because that's an important thing. And I know you've been kind of reading and interested in sleep and the way that it's affecting our rhythms and physiology and all of that. That he was saying that the people that are most in contact with the Fitra are these Bedouins who live out in the elements, who the horizon is their home, and the canopy of the stars is their is their is their roof, and they're so connected to the blows of wind and the sense, and their hearing and their sight is so sharp that they're actually right then and there, way more than anybody who's dulled those faculties, living in settlements and having comforts and luxuries and becoming a little bit you know what's the word, dulled, maybe we can say, in that sense. And that if that Bedouin would, if any civilized people from the settlements of cities were to meet a Bedouin and they were lost in the desert, they would depend on that Bedouin utterly, right? And sometimes I feel like, who are the Bedouins today that can help us civilized and settled people to really reclaim that thing, because he talks about these people that they're so in touch with themselves, and that because of that, they're more inclined to good, and they're more inclined to purity, and they're more inclined to courage, even, he says. Courage. And he says that good governance in these cities can be very healthy and actually supportive, like maybe even we can say in the realm of tarbiyah, like you can create the conditions with a healthy government. But if there's any type of oppression or authoritative kind of suppression or dictating by a top-down type of mechanism of governance, and you break the himma, you break the will of the people, if you override, he even says, at least in the translation, Rosenthal's translation, he says, you break the defense mechanisms of the people, you break their fortitude, you break their himma. And it's very difficult to heal that. This is Ibn Khaldun talking about this. It's fascinating. He understood these patterns, right? And so I just thought that was stunning in relation to the Fitra. Like, who today? Do we have Bedouins? I know people have gone to Mauritania.
It's interesting. There's a show on National Geographic called Primal Survivor by Howdell, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Hadil or something. And he's an American, and he goes out to all these indigenous tribes and learns their their rites of passage. And he ends up going on their rites of passage and trying to survive the trek. So he'd go to the Sahara and lead a camel from one region of the Sahara to the next, and adopting all their indigenous skills that he took from the tribes. And so you can see it, people really wanting to, you'll get these people that work in the city, and then in the weekend they're rushing off to the countryside to learn how to hunt and live in, we crave that now because we're so removed from it. And when I put up the sleep stuff on Facebook, some of the quotes, one guy said, I was brought up in the Maldives, And he says my sleep was just on another level there, and I came and lived in the city, and you can feel the difference in quality of your sleep. And I remember in Morocco when I used to sleep in the countryside, that was just the most amazing sleep, like 5 6 hours of sleep, and you were done. You just felt so deep, deeply refreshed after having some sleep out in the. I remember when we went to visit Mawli Arabi Darqawi's tomb. It's right out in the sticks, and we had to sleep in one of these people's houses out there. And we were sleeping out in the open night sky, and it's some of the most amazing sleep I've ever had. When you reconnect to that,
totally, I can testify to that as well. And I mean, I remember we did a trek in Wadi Rum in Jordan for a couple of days, and I mean, it's just stunning. There's nothing like the closest village barely has electricity, and then we're just middle of another maybe hour or two to the next big city, and it is unbelievable. I mean, the stars that night, you could feel like, I feel like you can just pluck them like little buttons and like just maybe put them on your shirt. So like you're just right in the thick of it. And what was moving for me at that moment is like I felt like I was in it. I felt like I was like plugged into nature finally. It's like I feel like all of us in the civilized world are like we live in parallel to nature. Like we're not in nature. Like we kind of like these shows of like these people in the Kalahari, and people that are like really good trackers and they can track animals, and they just see footprints and they know exactly the birds hovering. They're like in it, like wow, I wish I could be like that. Or these initiation rites that you're talking about, but it seems like a whole different world, like and then you have us civilized people, chronic disease, depressed, anxious, tired, all obese, all of these certain things that are happening spiritually, disconnected, void, maybe unfulfilled, and it's like this whole world of vitality, we're just living in parallel to it. It's like, how do I get in that thing? How do I plug myself into that? We crave it, and that is the fitra, and that's the bedouin. He's the guy in there. He's like, yo, it can be a different way. So it's like, how can we, I mean, it's been something I've been sitting with for the last few weeks. Like, how can we go back? I mean, we're here, for God's sake, I'm not planning on going out and moving out to the boonies, but how can we open up a portal into that world where we can travel into it and out of it more readily and appreciate it more and bring back the gifts here now? Like, that's something that,
I mean, something so simple as like I've been harping on about recently is going out at the sunrise and looking at the sky and looking at it when it sets to get your circadian rhythms in check. I mean, it's something so simple that all of us can do. Not to become fixated and have to do it every day, but get some sense of regularity where you're getting out for 2 to 10 minutes at about 20 minutes after sunrise, and then 20 minutes before sunset, and just feeling, and just that aura of that you just feel like the day's just started. And then you feel the day's just coming to a close, and your body actually starts to feel that it's ready, it's energized. And then also because your cortisol levels rise with that light in your eye, in a healthy way, the cortisol rise. And then when the sun's setting, your melatonin rises. So your body's almost energized at the beginning of the day, and then it settles at the end of the day, just to get a sense of that. That's something so simple that all of us can do.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. I mean, I tell people all the time, vitamin N is the most, or the most deficient in vitamin N, vitamin nature. I mean, we just don't get it, and there's all these Japanese practices, for example, Shirin-yoku, where they call it forest bathing, just being in nature, it's just, you don't have to do anything fancy. You don't have to learn this. You don't have to go do a whole weekend retreat and training to learn how to like be with just go take a walk with no agenda. Leave your phone, maybe. That's one thing, maybe. It's like leave your phone and smart devices in the car. And then just go spend half an hour and just try to plug into it. Plug into the world and try to just focus on what you're seeing. Like,
what birds can you detect? The bird sounds, what
Bird
type of bird it
sounds,
is, the
the different
trees,
types of
what the
sounds
tree
and
is.
that the wind makes in different trees. Hakeem
Can you
taught me
tell?
that.
Right.
Hakeem, I was with Hakeem in his backyard one day, and we're sitting and we had tamales. We had homemade tamales, one, which was
I don't know what
amazing.
you're talking about.
Yeah, it's a really nice Mexican
All
dish.
right.
And we sat outside. He has chickens and a cat and a nice little garden. And he was like, "Listen to the trees." And he's like, "Can you hear the difference?" And it was really windy that day. And uh, he taught me that. I'm like, I never noticed that. This was years ago, and I've kept that. And I'm like, what else can I? Now I go in like, what can I else can I notice? Like
Yeah.
the different crunch of leaves, the different smells as I keep walking through the forest. How can I become really aware of the fluctuations of senses that I mean, we're
Yeah,
getting
because
bombarded
it's there.
constantly.
It's
It's there,
there.
utterly.
It's just our awareness is not with it, and
Exactly.
it's about being able to pay attention and
Mm.
well. I'd say give your attention
Mm.
to these things, and Peter Levine says just when it starts raining, just to look outside the window and just explore the movements of the water going down the road and the patterns it makes.
Mm.
Or you do that for 10 minutes. He says there's healing just in that.
Isn't it amazing that our Prophet ﷺ used to go out on the first rain and
Mm,
uncover his shoulders and just feel it
mm,
too? I mean, witnessing, experiencing all of that. It's all really the same practice,
mm,
just that interfacing with nature.
mm.
That's the fitra. It doesn't matter how you do it. You can be. I mean, now it's freezing cold, right? It's snowing. We have
Well,
snow
yeah,
to our knees
yeah.
right now. It's -40 wind chill,
Oh,
but I can
right.
still look
You
outside.
got English weather there then.
It's Chicago weather, man. This is this is distinctly Chicago. But I went out and shoveled, and I took my daughter outside, and we're just playing in the snow, and she is reveling and trying to catch snowflakes on her tongue, and it's
Mm,
Jannah. I mean, just so it's freezing cold, but we're both loving it.
mm.
So I mean, any of these conditions are right for
Yeah,
experience.
it's like what you just said. It's not actually what you do, it's how you do. Like,
Yeah,
so whatever practice you adopt, if it's jogging, if it's yoga, if it's just going out in your back garden, it's not about what you do, it's about how you do it and the presence you bring to it.
that's right.
Is where the transformation takes place.
Some
So,
people can go out for a walk in nature, and then they got their music on loud, rock music,
mm,
or they're carrying all their stories from the previous day or
mm,
worries, and just walking in parallel to it.
mm,
They're not there. And then other people can just be strolling, maybe uneducated, people, non-academically, trained people, but they're walking in and they're just plugging in like this.
mm,
It's like the belief of the old lady in the story of Imam Razi. That's that
mm.
belief, that pure belief, that fitri belief, that's unconditioned. Mm. See, how about in terms of the trauma works more specifically? I know we have a little bit of time left here. How would you begin to orient or frame with trauma and the somatic work that we do, the
Mm.
fitra?
Well, it's that your organism, like we were saying, your organism knows what to do. It's just got to be given the space and the time. So first and foremost, we see from that hadith the sort of the skewing of the fitrah happens from the from social socially in your upbringing.
Mm-hmm.
That's demonstrated in that hadith where the parents choose a course for it that takes it away from its fitrah. And
Which
like
is
you were
not only just religion, right? If I may interject, I'm sorry, but it's not only religion here, right? We can
well, that's what
expand that.
I'm expand. That's the point. I'm
Great,
expanding it.
please,
It's
yeah.
like what you were saying is that a person comes into a session with all these negative beliefs about themselves. They're attacking themselves or they're attacking others and just directing these energies away from where they really want to potentiate. And so it's almost as a physician or a therapist or counselor, you're almost trying to just softly bring that back and towards what it is. And one of the key ways to do that is for them actually to be able to sit with their emotions. So invite, like I see when you're saying that, there's a lot of anger you're holding there. So you almost bring it back for them to experience themselves rather than them project it out or attack.
Absolutely.
It's like, that's, it seems really sad that you end up attacking yourself when you do that. Is that how it feels for you? Does that feel true for you? And it almost, they have to sit in the present and acknowledge that experience. And it brings it back so they can almost process this chaos that they're feeling inside or outside of themselves. So that's one way. And that, on a physiological point of view, in somatic work, so for example, say someone experiences physical pain, what we might do is, say someone has neck or back pain. In somatic work, we have a principle that the body, it has to go incredibly slowly to process what happened, because whatever happened to it that overwhelmed it was too quick, too fast, too soon, too much, too fast, too soon. And so we have to so if, say you had an ache in your shoulder blades or something like that, what one exercise we have is, we will slowly, micro movements, meet the ache, the pain. So we almost go into it and we go, oh, it's there. Okay, can you hold it for like a few seconds? And now what I'm going to invite you to do is, as you hold it, then can you gently bring your shoulders slowly back. And as you do that, the body starts to just recognize, oh, something's happened. And what you've done here, you've met the pain where it's at. So you've met it where it's at and acknowledged it. And then you're encouraging it to come out. And then the whole organism sort of says something's happened here, and it adapts. So I've had clients do that, and they just like, and they usually go to a chiropractor, and they're like, oh my God, like my shoulder blades just feel like so much more flexible.
Movement,
Now, what's so interesting here, what often happens is, after a little bit of feeling relief, it will go back to the holding pattern.
Absolutely.
But that's because it's like, that's what it's used to. It's got so used to that patterning. So then you go again. And then what it would do is, it will come out a little bit more than it did before, and then go back into the holding pattern. You keep this almost motion of this back and forthness until it starts to feel more room, and then it just opens up and surrenders to something larger. The Fitra, basically, it's what it feels like to feel health. So that's how we sometimes work with physical pain in somatic experiencing.
Great, exactly. And so just tying it back to our earlier discussion, then it's actually clinically doing the same thing at a smaller scale, plugging them back into the fitra, not big nature out there. I'm not telling my patients, hey, let's go for a walk outside, but just because fitra resides within you, you're interconnected right now. I mean, at the level of fitra, we're all connected. All the believers are connected, and really in some way, even all of creation is connected. And tapping into not only your life force, but in some way the life force of this entire thing that we're connected, we're embedded in as nature, as pieces and parts of nodes of light in the web of life, all of that. And so by touching into somatics, which is one of the great gifts that you and I both love so much, that's exactly what we're doing here in this space. We don't have to mimic nature. I don't have to have I have a little plant here, but I don't have to like create a jungle here for people to kind of like, tap in. It's all here. It's in here. It's flowing within you already. It's inviting back into the senses. That's what we're doing. And in doing that, inviting them back into that integration, into that wholeness that's already there, and allowing it to extend into the parts that they've pulled away from the wholeness, the fragmentation, the dissociation, the hurt, the pain, the aches, the throbbing, whatever it is. All that, and let the life force of the fitra subsume all of you back again. That's health. By definition. And we have to define that properly. It's not just pain-free. What does that even mean? And it doesn't produce a type of approach. It doesn't allow for anything, practical to emerge from them. But if we can define it as fitra, as proper life force, a proper function and structure and state of the organism, ruh, jism, nafs. Okay, now you're getting somewhere. Now we're laying out principles, and we're laying out a blueprint of how we can begin to understand what's going on in the human being, what health is at the ideal. And then when we see an individual who is, who has issues, who has conditions, who has pain, who has anxiety, depression, how they moved away from the fitrah, and how to map and individualize a way for them to return back. That's Islamic healing. That's hikmah. That's hikmah in a nutshell. You know, that's what makes it so elegant and timeless. You know, that's why no technology can ever outstrip this wisdom, because this is exactly what speaks to man's condition, capital M. You know, and that will never change. And it's the worldview and the paradigm of the Bedouin there, just standing. Doesn't matter if we start flying and flying plane, flying cars, and we're like the Jetsons and stuff. It doesn't matter. It's still, this is what we have to bring for us to be well, in terms of a worldview, a healing paradigm, a religious, spiritual paradigm, an environmental paradigm, a community paradigm, fitra-centric. It's exactly what it needs to be. Alhamdulillah.
Good place to stop.
Okay, and thank you, Sidi Jazakallah khairan, for very exciting, the first episode of season 2. Inshallah, everyone enjoyed that conversation. Please, of course, share your feedback and share this conversation with your friends and family, and let's really open this conversation up and continue to bring, inshallah ta'ala, this hikmah that is our inheritance, wallahi, our deepest inheritance, not just from the Hakims and our ancestors, but really from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is his teaching, this is his nur, this is his knowledge, inshallah ta'ala. And let's bring it back, inshallah ta'ala. Jazakallah khairan, Sayyidi Shaykh.
No problem.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.